Hey everyone, this is Jason. Let me read this article to you. Looking for security. More in the United States are picking up a handgun. This is a New York Times article. Don't hold that against it. A new study of gun ownership in the United States notes a shift. Americans are increasingly interested in handguns, the types of small weapons that are easily hidden and used for self defense, rather than the rifles and shotguns used for hunting and shooting sports. The study, conducted in 2015 by researchers from Harvard and Northeastern universities, sought to better understand the size and composition of the country's gun inventory. It found that handguns made up 42% of the country's privately owned firearms, up from 34% in 1994. I'll leave a link below for this article. It's got some really good statistics, some interesting stuff, some graphs. Beth Alcazar, a mother in Alabama, carries two handguns nearly all the time, a practice she began in 2014. Often when she wakes up, she slips one in her purse and the other in a belly band and heads out for the day's errands in suburban Alabama. Alcazar, 41, I'm 40, lives in a suburb called Chelsea and has little interest in hunting. Her primary reason for carrying? Protection. I have three very important reasons why I carry a gun, she said in a recent interview, and those are my children. Oh, Jesus. The survey indicates that a growing number of gun owners like Alcazar, they cite personal safety as a major incentive for owning a gun. In 1994, only 46% of recipients who chose protection as the primary reason to own a gun. 2 decades later, 63% of recipients made that selection. Jesus Christ. And then it notes that in the first survey, participants could only use one reason for ownership, and the second they could use several. So that's very misleading. That's a very misleading poll. Probably it was more like 50%. So, but it's gone up. Applications for concealed carry permits hit records in some places, giving rise to a group of people who consider themselves part of a concealed carry lifestyle. Alcazar, who bought a gun in 2013 after an armed man took 5 girls hostage at her daughter's middle school, counts herself amongst them. The episode pushed her to become a firearms instructor and focus her writing career on guns. And now she runs an Alabama chapter of the Well-Armed Women, a national network of gun owners, and contributes to concealed carry magazines. Jesus Christ. It was a fire that sparked within me, she said of the hostage situation. Oh my God, this is 6 miles from my home. These are my children, and I need to know everything I can about protecting them. What were you going to do there, John Wayne? Like, you're gonna get there for the cops? It was just on. She's just coming in like Michelle Michelle Rodriguez and shit. Like she's fucking Kate Beckinsale. I mean, what the fuck? Too much television, too much movies, too much fiction, too much 24-hour news cycle, too much fear shit. Fear. Let me read on. While the percentage of households with guns has declined to 22% from 25%, the net number of guns and gun owners have gone up. In 1994, about 44 million Americans owned 192 million guns. Today, about 55 million Americans own 265 million guns. That's amazing. If you break that down, only 55 million Americans own guns, but they own 265 million of them. I wonder what side of the political agenda they are on, right or left? The 2015 study also revealed that many of Americans' guns were concentrated in small numbers of hands. About half of the nation's guns are owned by 3% of the population. Wow. The demographic profiled paranoid right-wing freakos. People who are terrified. They're just scared. The demographic profile of these super collectors has changed little since the last significant study. Most are male, white, older than 30, from rural areas, and have an annual income above 25 grand. Yep. I think we know some of those people on YouTube. And some famous ones. Alex Jones. Who owns the handguns? Academics and others watching the gun industry cite a number of reasons for the shift to handguns. A 24-hour news cycle has made the world feel more dangerous. A declining rural population and waning interest in hunting have pushed gun companies to look for new customers. Industry groups have heavily marketed the idea of concealed carry and personal protection. Yeah, in every movie that you see it come out of Hollywood, everyone gets solved with a gun. Have you noticed that? You don't think that's from the gun industry? And I'm going to make a related point here. You're not allowed to advertise alcohol and cigarettes, right? You're not allowed on television or movies. But you notice that every movie you see or television show that's regulated by this, because some internet shows aren't, some internet groups like Netflix and so forth, but Still, you can't advertise cigarettes. How do they get away with that? They show people smoking and drinking. Doesn't matter what they show them drinking. It doesn't matter where it comes from. They show them drinking and they show them smoking. Watch the show Mad Men and tell me that that wasn't an advertisement paid for largely by the alcohol and tobacco industry. Every single, and I know people smoked a lot in the 60s, but you didn't have to include that. It wasn't an integral part of the, they skipped out on enough other detail. Why would they include that detail? They weren't exactly, come on. So they chose to keep that, and this happens in every movie. You see Brad Pitt light up a cigarette. You see some actress or some actor drink something and it's not, you don't see the brand, they're just doing it. And it's paid for by the industry. And that's the same thing with guns. The gun industry, they're chipping in money so that Colt gets shown in the movie, or the Ruger, or the Mossberg, or the, choose your weapon. And so they're advertising this idea of violence, thus paying for the movies being made, and the movies always end in violence. Always in. Chris Matthews made this great point when the first Matrix came out that long ago about, this movie is really smart and has all these things going for it, and at the end, how do they solve all the problems? Guns. They have all their imagination at their access, and all they can come up with is guns. It's just this culture, and people watch this shit, and they go after the news cycles on this article, but really, I don't think people are watching news that much. I think it's coming from Hollywood. I think it's coming, and they don't include that, of course. The New York Times does it, and they don't look into it because I think that, first of all, it's too obvious. Somehow fiction is not supposed to influence us as people. This is a psychological study that's been done, by the way, by a few universities and so forth. If you Google this topic, about how kids see media and how it desensitizes them. And as you become desensitized, it also creates an element of fear. And I don't think there's any doubt of the correlation between the increase in the internet, violent video games, violent movies and television, and everything being solved with a firearm in my generation, and now gun ownership for personal protection has increased. This woman, what is her name? What is her last name? Alcazar. She's 41. Well, I'm 40 years old. You're telling me, and she said her personal motivation was because these girls were kidnapped at her school. Fair enough. But everybody doesn't have that personal motivation. So the reason they're buying more handguns is because they're terrified of what they're seeing, not only on television, but what they're seeing in movies, what they're seeing on the news, what they're seeing everywhere. Fictional. How many, if you look up this statistic of how many simulated deaths you see before you're, say, 14, 13, 12, before you can really comprehend what's fiction or nonfiction, you see something like, what was the number? 10,000 simulated deaths on television and movies. So when you see all this simulated death, you then become, it has to do something to your fear factor. It has to create a fear of the world around you, of the other. And America is very good at that as well. I don't want to go too far into that, but there's a concept about the other, and that started out with the Indians. They were savage. You had to reduce them to savages. They were the ones scalping us. They were the ones killing us, which wasn't true. Then the blacks, they were too dumb, and they were violent, and when they didn't know their place, and that's when racism starts to kick in, because then you call black people lazy, and you say they're different from you white people, and that gives validity to slavery. Right? And it's not just a byproduct of slavery, but it's a creation to justify slavery. Then you get the communists. That was the other. The scary communism was the worst thing that could ever happen to the world. And if it came into America, it would destroy America. That was another fear. And now, say it with me, folks. What's the other right now that we're all fighting? I'll give you've all said it already in your minds. The Muslim. The terrorist, but we all know terrorist is just a word for Muslim. So Muslims, and by the way, this was my generation, was influenced by this heavily because of all of the hijackings in the 80s and the 90s, or predominantly the 80s, late 70s, by Arab hijackers, right? So we identified Arabs as hijackers already, and then you have 9/11. And 9/11 just scared everybody to fucking death. And it showed the news that if you show the worst shit possible as much as you possibly can, you'll drive ratings up and you'll drive interest in your shit up. Now you have Twitter and MSNBC, and you really have to scare people to get them to watch your product. And then that drives advertising up, and then everyone makes more money because it's capitalism. Because it's about surplus. It's not about what we need. It's not about being informed in a democracy. It's about money. And it's about surplus capital. So, and I'll put that in every single video because that's the whole point of all of capitalism is surplus. The extra that you get that is not distributed in our society, but it's held by a few, and then they can propagandize you. But that's a digression. The reason gun ownership is up is because of fear. I don't think it's good that Americans have handguns, any kind of guns, other than to hunt and to protect yourself. I'm not at the point where I'm not a person who is fearful when I go out. There's a lot of scared people who believe that there is oppression and things lurking around every corner. I'm not one of those people. I'm not paranoid. I'm not scared. I can protect myself. I can handle myself in a fight. But at 40 years old, I hope I never get into a fight. There's no reason to get into a fight, or any kind of conflict with any other person. I don't worry too much if someone's going to, break into my home like in a movie. Well, there's 320 million people in this country. It's ridiculous for me to worry about that because the percentage is so tiny. I have more chance of being hit in my car, being killed in my car, than I do with the firearm, or being attacked or robbed or any of that, or mugged or have anything ever happen to me. I have more likelihood of being killed by a medical error than I would guns. A doctor making a mistake. I have more likelihood of being killed by a vaccine when I'm older, an allergic reaction to a vaccine, if I was an older person who got the flu vaccine or something like that. So then I am of being robbed or having any violent crimes happen to me. And that's a true fact. But people don't believe that because and I think this article does I'm just pointing out the science of the article. They leave out Hollywood. I think Hollywood's fiction, the fiction of Hollywood, gives us this idea of a world that doesn't exist. And then the news reinforces it through their bad news. You live in Texas and you hear about a shooting in Maine. What the fuck does that have to do with you? You wouldn't even have known that happened in the world if it wasn't for this 24-hour news cycle. And then you're scared and you believe that that's going to happen to you because that's how human brains work. And the news knows this, and the gun owners of the gun manufacturers of this country know this. I think Hollywood should get more blame. Fictional deaths and video games should get more blame than they do for the increase in gun ownership in this country. I'm not saying it's the only reason. I think there's multiple reasons, fear porn, definitely hardcore right-wing scare tactics about the government collapse and about imminent dollar collapse and about all that shit. These public shootings that kill 30 kids in a school, 20 kids in a school, all this shit drives this. And it's not just one cause, it's many. But I think this article gives you a decent breakdown, gives you some nice graphs, but really leaves out one key component, and that's Hollywood. Thank you for listening.